It's such a great pleasure to be here with everyone. I've looked very much forward to this Sales 3.0 virtual conference and an opportunity to present. I've really enjoyed a lot of the presentations that I've seen earlier today, and as well looking forward to some more tomorrow. I was told when I came on to prep for this session, I was asked the question if I wear the same thing every day. As you can see from my photo there, as well as some initial promo work that I did with Gerhard a week or two ago. I don't wear the same thing every day, but I do wear the same thing probably most days because when I'm on the road and like to travel light. So with that, anyway, let's jump into this research study that we did at the Brooks Group. Now, the Brooks Group is a sales training, assessments, consulting, and coaching company. We've been around for 40 plus years. And our mission is to have a deep understanding of sales teams, sales individuals, sales leadership, so that we can help them transform and therefore achieve breakthrough results. And in doing that, we tend to do regular studies and deep dives into sales leadership and individual sellers, studying thousands of individual sellers every year and hundreds of sales leaders to have an understanding of what they're struggling with, what their priorities are, and more importantly, what makes the difference between high performance, meeting and exceeding targets, and underperforming, not hitting those targets. So let me tell you a little bit about a research study we did a couple of months ago that we are just publishing now and putting out in the market for 2024. This was a study, a deep dive study into 155 North American B2B sales leaders with organizations of $50 million or more across 16 different industries. And we went very deep with them to really understand all of what was going on in their organization, what they were struggling with, what they were running into in this complex economic environment. But importantly, as I said earlier, we split that data looking at those teams that met or exceeded their sales targets and what they were doing differently, what they were prioritizing differently, the perspective that they had that was different from those organizations that were underperforming. And we found some very interesting things. Now, what I'm going to share with you here are just a couple of the priorities or the key areas that we saw where these higher performing teams were differentiating themselves from underperforming teams. Some of this may be surprising and new to you. Some of this may be just a return to fundamentals. Let's look at what those things are. I want to spend the next 20 minutes walking through our data and our findings and our perspective in each of these four. Number one is sales process adherence. I'll share a little bit more about this, but going back to process, consistency of behavior and activity appears to be very important in driving success in today's environment. Number two, we're going to talk about some essential selling skills. And I want to highlight one in particular that we're seeing that is very important for organizations to focus on in order to drive that performance. Number three is hiring and onboarding. Higher performing organizations are doing this differently today. They're focused in a couple of key areas that are making their hiring and onboarding activities much more effective, getting individuals ready to be out in the field with customers as quickly as possible. And number four, this is one we've been talking about for decades in this industry, is coaching. But there are a couple of nuances around coaching that we found in our study that I'm eager to share with you. So let's go through each of these fours. Let's start with sales process adherence. Here's an interesting fact that we found in the research. The vast majority, 90+% of organizations will indicate that they have a sales process. It's written somewhere, it's on a wall somewhere, it's been established in some way. Having a sales process does not make the difference between performing, hitting those targets and not hitting those targets today. What does make a difference is careful, consistent, diligent adherence to that process. 95% of successful teams, those hitting or achieving or exceeding target, are closely adhering to their sales process. Now, the opposite of that is true. We found 83% of teams that rarely follow their sales process were underperforming. So today, the big difference is those organizations that not only have the process, but keep their people very focused, in diligently and consistently following it. One other interesting point around process that we found is those successful teams are more competent. They understand better, they're more capable, they have greater confidence across all of the stages in the sales process compared to underperforming teams. They know what they should be and can be doing in each of those process steps to help them in the execution of those steps. Now, what I wanted to take a minute to do here is walk a little bit deeper into what that process can look like. Many, many years ago at the Brooks Group, we established what we believe is an elegant, intuitive, simple process for salespeople to follow. It's called Impact. It was developed by our founder, Bill Brooks. Now, Impact has 6 steps to it. That said, you spend the vast majority of your time as a salesperson in those first 3 steps. Let me walk through each of these 6 here quickly, but I also want to highlight for you what we're seeing as we assess salespeople and their capability to follow this process, what we're seeing as the areas where salespeople are performing better and where they're struggling across these 6 areas. So we start with investigate. That's our positioning, our initial prospecting, the pre-call planning that we're doing before we go in to meet with the customer. The meet step is building that trust as a strategic advisor and creating a positive initial impression with the customer. Probe is all of the questioning, the critical listening to dive deeper in discovery with that customer. Now, as I said earlier, what we recommend is organizations think about spending 70% of their time in these first 3 upfront categories of the process. By doing that, you have built that trust and you have a much deeper understanding of the customer, allowing you then to execute the back part of this process more effectively. The back part of the process also has 3 steps: applying, having a value formula to prove the ROI to the customer. That's layering the solution onto that situation that you have uncovered with the customer. Convincing the customer, justifying your price, improving your claims, handling any objections that customer might have, and finally tying it up, asking for the business, closing the business. Now, here's what's interesting. We have what we call a selling skills index. It's an assessment that helps to validate the acumen of a salesperson across each of these steps. We have thousands of salespeople take that assessment every year. Here's what we find in the aggregate. Salespeople have the ability to identify the right things to do in each of these steps about half the time on average. But there are certain areas where they're more capable today, and there are certain areas where they're less capable today. Here are 3 areas I recommend, based on our research, that organizations should focus. Number 1 is in that investigate step. Are we doing enough pre-call planning? Are we identifying that ideal customer profile? And are we thinking critically before we go in to meet with that prospect enough about their business to have that understanding and be able to position ourselves properly? Salespeople tend to underperform in their capability in this area. Tie it up at the end of that process. We're not as good at asking for that business, getting those next steps and those commitments from customers. This is another place organizations we're finding don't have as much capability, tend to underperform. Need to focus there. But if I were to recommend one place for organizations to focus, both on the research we've done with individual sellers, as well as the research we've done with broader sales organizations, it would be in that probe step, in discovery, critical listening, understanding, getting to a deeper understanding of that customer. We tend to underperform here, and it makes a difference when the organization is trying to meet or exceed target. Let me share with you a little bit about that. This is our second strategy, second point that we were going to talk about in this presentation. Effective discovery and questioning builds value. 54% of successful teams use what we consider top 2 questioning strategies versus 33% of underperforming teams. So majority of successful teams are using these strategies. Most underperforming teams are not using these strategies in their discovery and their questioning. Again, on the average, all organizations are only doing this really well about half the time, but overperforming teams tend to be doing it more often than underperforming teams. Let me tell you what these questioning strategies are. Number one is that seller being able to understand not only what the customer needs to buy at a very surface level to match a solution, but also what they want to accomplish at a deeper level. What are the business priorities? What are they emotionally driven to do? What are they trying to achieve in their business? Sellers who dig deeper in their questioning to that layer tend to be meeting and exceeding target at a much higher level. But secondly, and also important, are asking those questions to identify what the customer needs to do as part of a buying decision. What is the process to decide? We know these buying decisions are becoming more complex. There's more stakeholders involved. Indecision is a much greater issue now than it has ever been. Our sellers need to do critical questioning to understand that process in order to be helpful in navigating that process with the customer. So again, as we look across the sales process, very important to adhere to, there is one skill area in that process we would recommend organizations focus on right now, because we're seeing it make a big difference between those who perform at target and those who underperform. And that is that critical questioning, that discovery, that digging deeper to understand what it is that that customer wants to do in their business. So let me move forward here, tell you about a couple of other things in the study. I mentioned earlier hiring and onboarding, making sure sellers are capable and engaged from day one in the organization. Two things we would recommend here that really stood out, two nuances in our study that are important for us to consider. Number one, it's the use of hiring tools, assessments, behavioral interview questions, and references in making effective selection. 63% of organizations that consistently use these assessments in the hiring process are confident in their ability to achieve their 2024 sales objectives. A majority of them hit their 2023 sales objectives, and that's compared to a very small plurality of underperforming teams that use these types of assessments. Now, when we talk about using assessments in that hiring and that recruiting process, we're talking about getting a deeper understanding of the behavioral and communication profile of the individual. How will they communicate? How will they behave? But also going deeper and looking at the motivational profile of that individual. What drives them? Categorically, what are they interested in achieving in their career and their job? It's very important to know that, particularly as you're slotting different sellers into different specialized sales roles. You need to understand how they're motivated, or you may get the wrong motivational match for a particular sales role. Mindset is also really important to study. We need to understand, are they bringing the right mindset, mental clarity, and understanding of their capability to the job, so that you know you're getting people with confidence and clarity into how they can execute. There are assessments and sciences that can help any organization uncover all of those details. And we highly recommend, based on our research, that organizations investigate using those. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about onboarding here, what we like to call structured hybrid onboarding. And these are the two nuanced pieces of language in onboarding that make a big difference. Number one, you want to make sure you've structured your onboarding to give your new salespeople three things in particular. One, that organizations tend to do really well, and two, that they don't do as well. The one that they do well is give them a deep understanding of the solution that they're selling. This tends to be where most organizations focus their onboarding efforts. But there are two other areas that are really important to consider as well. Number two is an understanding of the customer and the market that these sellers are selling into. And number three is the process, the capability, the important skills they will need to execute in that market. So thinking about your onboarding, you want to structure it to make sure it has all of those elements. Second, you want to make sure it has a hybrid structure to it. What do I mean by hybrid? I mean, it has both live events for deep learning, better understanding, better recollection of everything that they've learned, and virtual events to reinforce, follow up, keep sharp on everything that they've learned. The best organizations, those organizations that are meeting and exceeding targets in our study, are practicing hybrid onboarding, deep dive live sessions, but also followed up with virtual sessions to reinforce, coach, and support that learning. So finally, I want to talk as well about coaching. And as I mentioned, coaching has been around for a long time. It's something we've tried to focus on. Many organizations have invested in developing their managers to coach. We all say we need our managers coaching. But there are a couple of areas around coaching that we see as particularly important today, a couple of nuances that I want you to consider. Number one is empowering managers to use coaching as a method for continuous learning and development. You have to draft your managers not only into deal coaching, but also skill development coaching among your people. Lock those managers into continuous development around what individuals are learning in sales training. Going back to process adherence, those managers need to understand the process so that they can effectively coach to each step of it. They need to understand the skills that are most important for individual sellers to have and what best practice looks like in those skills so they can coach specifically to those skills. Again, there is general coaching, there's deal coaching, but we need to think about coaching in continuous support of learning and development efforts. It's critically important that managers have that mindset going into their coaching activity. Secondly, and this is a little bit of the how to execute coaching at a team level, we find peer coaching is particularly important. A majority of high-performing organizations, those meeting and exceeding sales targets, are utilizing peer coaching versus a very small minority of those organizations that are underperforming. Now, one thing that I've seen recently that works really effectively with peer coaching is when you are reinforcing training in the organization is to give every person who is engaged in that training a job to do in developing others. This is a good example of peer coaching. And we've seen with some organizations we've worked with recently, a significant lift in the engagement and the application of skills learned in training when those individual sellers feel they have a responsibility to develop other people on the team. They come prepared to group coaching sessions, team coaching sessions with a job to do, knowing they have something they need to teach back to that group. Again, the best organizations are the ones who are locking into this peer coaching and making it part of their continuous development plan. So I want to get to some questions and discussion around this. I'm excited about that, but let me just summarize really quickly what we learned in this study and also give you a couple of places where you can get the study. You can download some of our content and learn more about this. I do want to mention really quickly, for those interested, based on the previous slide that I just shared around coaching, we are doing a webinar tomorrow. Our head of research, as well as one of our lead facilitators, are getting together to go deeper on some of these coaching nuances that we're seeing in the market today. We'll post the link to that webinar if anybody is interested in learning a little bit more and going deeper on that coaching topic specifically. But here are the 4 things in summary, one more time. Adhering consistently to a sales process. It's making the difference today. It's giving sellers something they can do in every step, making sure the organization is consistently approaching the market in a high quality way. We've got to identify those particular skills that are making a difference. I would strongly suggest probing and questioning that will give that team an advantage in training the team on those. We need to reinforce the skills and the process through coaching, as I just mentioned, and we need to think about our hiring and our onboarding. Are we bringing the right assessment and understanding to those individuals we're bringing into the organization? And are we practicing structured hybrid onboarding in our onboarding program? Those are our recommendations in a nutshell. There's a much deeper study that goes behind all of this that I'd love for folks to download. We're available to have more conversation around it. Love to connect with individuals on LinkedIn around these reports. So you can scan the QR code there to get our 2024 Sales Leader Trend Report that I just shared some high level around. Also, if you want to understand this impact sales process more deeply, there's a QR code there as well. So Dana, I'd love to take a couple of questions, have a little bit of a discussion here in the remaining time.
Good stuff. Yeah, we do have a few questions, starting with going kind of all the way back to the beginning where you laid out the elegant and simplistic impact methodology. We do have somebody asking a question about the I stage. And what are your views on when it comes to the I stage? How can we gather information on prospects? Their issues, their priorities, and so forth. I think they're just asking for ideas around gathering key information at that prospecting stage.
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think there's a lot of technologies that we all know can help us to do that. Social media technologies, data sources. There's, of course, everything publicly available on the web. So I think you really want to inventory for your particular ideal customer profile and industry, what tools are best for you to use to get the best possible information. There are also some technology tools out there that will make inferences or calculations around individuals and their proclivities that may be of help to you as well, that go a little bit deeper in that understanding of companies and individuals. But I do think the practice that's really important for individuals to adopt is creating hypotheses and doing critical thinking around the information that you do have. Developing enough of an understanding of that organization, those individuals, the market that they operate in, that you can ask reasoned, intelligent questions of them. That flows right into your discovery, right? Just trying to be as prepared as possible for deeper level, nuanced discovery. And a lot of that is practice of that hypotheses generation between managers and individuals or among team members. That's a great opportunity for team coaching. But it's not just a matter of gathering information and going through the motions. It's a matter of using that information effectively to develop the hypotheses that will guide the conversation.
That's great. We have another comment kind of in question form here. So one of our listeners commented that, deal and skill coaching is a form of continuous learning, and that it's in the context of the deal where it can be really valuable to focus your development efforts. So along those lines, how do you encourage managers to coach with the pressure of also inspecting the pipeline?
Well, that is actually a very good point or articulation there of you can coach skill in the context of the deal. That's absolutely correct. And I think what managers need to do is step a little bit away from that urgency mindset of just managing the pipeline, to look for those opportunities to build the longer term capability of the individuals to execute the pipeline, right? They say too many times opening the oven door and the cake falls instead of rising, right? We spend too much effort sometimes analyzing, cutting data 100 different ways, looking at the pipeline or the CRM, and that can take our focus off of really getting close to and supporting the people doing the activity that builds that pipeline, that moves that pipeline forward in the process. So yes, it's true. We can coach skill in the context of the deal. And I really like the way that's articulated, but we cannot forget that we are playing a long game. We're developing these people to be able to do more effectively behavior in future deals.
Great point. And sort of still within the realm of coaching, we have a couple more questions. The next one would be, how do you ensure that coaches are coaching what they need to coach, I assume, according to established standards and so forth, but most importantly, not just based on what they think. So I think like sort of established standards versus opinion-based coaching. How do you make sure you sort of police that, so to speak?
Well, and I think that goes back to process adherence, right? I think the organizations that have a process, and by that I mean an expectation of these are the things that we do. This is the way we do them. This is the way we set up meetings. These are the types of meetings we want to execute. These are the milestones by which we feel comfortable moving forward, aligned to our customers' buying process, as we take deals through the pipeline. If those things are not established, if they're not mapped out, if they're not adopted as a part of a culture, then you've got everybody doing it kind of the way they think it should be done. So from the top to the bottom in the organizations, it's critically important that that common language, that common process is established. That gives managers something to coach against.
Yeah, that's probably key in terms of order of operations, because without it, we find ourselves essentially scaling and institutionalizing the dysfunction. And that's not what we want to do.
Well, yeah, and you have different modes of activity being filtered down through different individuals, some of which may be really good, but there's a question as to whether anything can be adopted in scale under a model like that.
That's right. That's right. Still within the swim lane of coaching. So how do we leverage coaching as a discipline or a practice, not just to cover, frontline to individual contributor, but how do we run it all the way up to include coaching for various levels of management, including directors and VPs and all of that good stuff? What have you seen?
Well, I think number one, it's not having the assumption that individuals are well skilled at it, number one. Number two, in good practice around it, and that their skills are fresh. I've been in leadership positions for many, many years. There's a lot I'm still learning about coaching, a lot I have to remind myself about coaching. There's ways in which I can get much better at doing it, as well as many of the executives on my team. And I think it's important for us to invest, time, effort, and attention in making sure we're doing it well. Coaching, as it would be defined in helping individuals self-diagnose things that they can do better in their particular domain, it's a principle and it's a practice that needs to be reinforced and trained throughout the organization.
Makes sense. And I guess since this topic has gotten so much interest, which is, I'm sure, not surprising to you and your research, this is an area, this is, one of those things that it's something we want to crack. How do we do this effectively? This is more of a question that I have, but it's kind of building on all of these comments. When you think about the fact that we all just sort of say we need managers to coach, we need them to coach, some of these areas makes you wonder, what should we be doing, if anything, to systematize the quality of our coaches, whether it's putting managers through various levels of certification, ensuring that they have the ability to not mistake telling for actual feedback, and falling into opinion-based and comfort habits. Like, what can we do to create a little bit of I don't want to say certification per se, but some sort of structure that sort of identifies, here are the really top coaches on this, within our sales organization, and here are sort of the rising stars, so to speak, to maybe even introduce some competition.
Competition, certification, all of those are things I've personally worked with some of the largest organizations in the world to implement, and they work really well when you have the discipline and and are willing to make the investments to keep them going. But I think what's really important, one point that I will make on that, is it's very important to give everyone in a leadership role a fundamental understanding and a why and a desire for leadership, to be a leader, what that means to be a leader, the responsibility that you're taking on, that role in its definition, before you start layering on little tactics of what they should do. People who have a why for a leader, where they have a vision for what they want to accomplish as a leader, what they should be doing as a leader, can better digest and use tactical recommendations around leadership and coaching. If they don't have that, you'll tell them to do specific things, but they don't have a context into how to apply those things as part of their job. So taking that pause, making sure people have been given that fundamental developmental leadership training is an important first step.
Excellent. And Gerhard, I see you're off of mute. Was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm curious about only one question. Spencer, can you educate us? Are there any boundaries to coaching that we need to be mindful of?
When you say boundaries of coaching, meaning like too much activity or too much intervention on the part of the manager?
Yeah.
Is that, I'll go back to the way I like to define it, which is the goal of the coach is to help the individual self-diagnose development. If that individual doesn't appreciate and understand the things that he or she needs to do better as part of the role, and let's take more specifically that coaching and that discovery. A manager cannot force an individual who they're managing to have the curiosity and the interest and the critical thinking needed to do the kind of depth of discovery that sellers need to do today. So you have to inspire, you have to bring that fire to them, to borrow the Prometheus analogy, right? You have to get it to ignite inside of them. And once they understand the power in connection they can make with a customer by doing the deep thinking and the activity necessary, then you've achieved your job. If you're just doing it for them, if you're co-riding with them and doing the discovery for them, they'll never learn. So that's overstepping your bounds as a manager, is to, in a sense, as a coach, is to lead from the front like that and never help that individual develop the desire inside of themselves.
I think that's very wise advice, because I like the idea of putting the salesperson into the driver's seat when it comes to self-development and not impose it, but enable it.
And that goes back to the peer coaching idea that we were talking about before. Yep. When peers are helping peers develop that strength, and if a manager can facilitate that peer coaching on his or her team,
yep,
that's creating a much greater motivation for those individuals to take responsibility over developing those skills, because they see they're supporting each other in the lift.
Right. It reminds me of a quote by Montaigne, the French writer. He says, we can be more knowledgeable with other people's knowledge, but we cannot be wise with other people's wisdom. And I think that it's the role of the coach to lead the salesperson to that wisdom they need to get to the next level.
Very well said. Very well said.